Hello and good morning. I'm Mark Quinn. Welcome to ETV and ETV Radio's special coverage of South Carolina's 95th inaugural. The inaugural of Governor-elect Nikki Haley, upcoming here later on this morning. I'm joined in our ETV studios by Dr. Walter Edgar, one of the preeminent historians of South Carolina. Dr. Edgar, always glad to have you along.
Mark, my pleasure.
And you have been here for a number of these inaugurations, but this one's special, in many ways historic.
Yes, it's historic in somewhat. First of all, it's the first time we've had a woman governor in South Carolina. First time we've had someone from a minority elected governor of South Carolina.
Let's go ahead and take it out to the state capitol grounds, and we'll begin today's proceedings. We are receiving word that any moment now they will begin this very, I guess you could call it a pomp and circumstance, a very serious occasion.
A serious occasion. It's also a celebration. Lots of dignitaries, both local, national, and international, will be here for the occasion.
I will point out that there are a number of international dignitaries who will be here. Chief among them, Representative Ambassador from India. Of course, this story making national, international news. A big story also there in India, where she has received an awful lot of coverage here for this election. Of course, there is another Indian-American governor, Bobby Jindal, in Louisiana. But Miss Haley, of course, appearing on the cover of Newsweek earlier this year, is now, I guess you could say, a national figure in many ways.
Oh, there's no question she's a national figure. And the fact that she is elected in South Carolina makes it even more news.
I might want to add that normally we are out there on the State House grounds on a platform just there on the south side of the Capitol steps, but because of the weather here for the last couple of days in the northern part of the state, including Columbia with the snow and ice, it was very difficult to bring you the same exact production we have normally for the last few occasions just like this, and we thought it was more prudent for us to be here right in the studios. And when it's 35 degrees outside, Dr. Edgar, maybe not so bad.
Well, I did have my long johns and overcoat ready to because the last two were also cold. It seems like our gubernatorial inaugural ceremonies, January is always iffy in South Carolina, but both of Governor Sanford's inaugurals were very cold and windy.
We would like to thank the 246th Army National Guard Band of the South Carolina National Guard, commanded by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Jesse Moreland, for today's pre-ceremony musical program. And our ceremonies will begin shortly.
Okay, so John Clark saying the ceremonies will get underway momentarily. In the meantime, as we talked about Governor Mark Sanford, he's leaving office now after 8 years. And apparently, Mr. Clark is going to go ahead now.
The ceremony of the state of South Carolina will now begin. Music for the processional will be Procession of the Chosen, composed by Larry Taggart, performed by the 246th Army National Guard Band of the South Carolina National Guard. Please remain seated during the processional. Presenting the honorable members of the General Assembly. The distinguished members of the House of Representatives are led by the Sergeant-at-Arms carrying the mace, followed by the Clerk of the House, Charles Reed, and Speaker of the House, Robert W. Harrell, Jr., and Mrs. Harrell.
Well, the General Assembly, of course, called to order yesterday. The session officially began. It was a rather light schedule, obviously, because of the inclement weather. Many of the representatives unable to make it here to Columbia on time, but they did come to session and call to order. Of course, they're facing a massive budget shortfall this year, in excess of $800 million. So all of the folks you see here walking down the steps today are facing a pretty tough job ahead over the course of the next 6 months. It'll be interesting to see how this particular governor works with the General Assembly. That has been a hot topic of conversation in politics for the last 8 years. Governor Sanford, in many respects, has been criticized for his inability to get along with many of the folks you see walking down the south side of those Capitol steps right now.
That's absolutely, and that was an issue, of course, in the gubernatorial campaign. That Mr. Shaheen, who's a member of the state Senate, argued that he would be able better to get along with the General Assembly than Governor-elect Haley, who had something of a contentious relationship with members of the House. That played out in the campaign. Since then, it looks like, given her appointment and using Ambassador Wilkins as chief of her transition team, that she certainly is making an effort to reach out to those who might not necessarily have been her supporters early on.
That was one of the first public moves that she made, and it was incredibly popular down there at the state capitol. You're right. Speaker Wilkins, Ambassador Wilkins, remains an extremely popular figure with most of the men and women there after his service as Speaker of the House, and his ability to sort of massage things and get along with folks. I think many people down there hoping some of that rubs off on her as well, because I think point of fact would be that many folks just unhappy at the intractability of Governor Sanford in many cases over the last 8 years.
Well, you know, it's going to be important for the state. We have this budget shortfall, but really we're looking at what will happen in this session. I think, without being overly dramatic, will literally shape the future of this state for the next generation. And the decisions made are going to be very fateful ones.
And now we're about to see the members of the South Carolina Senate proceed down those steps as well.
And folks may notice that both houses are led by Sergeant-at-Arms carrying very traditional items. The mace of the House of Representatives dates back to the colonial period, when our colonial Commons House of Assembly decided it was as good as the House of Commons in Parliament, and it had a mace to symbolize its authority. The Senate has the sword of state, which is also a symbol of authority, and when those items are in front of the Speaker's podium in both houses, then they are in session.
Also, some of the language they use during Inauguration Day seems to date well far back in the English language to an extent. Some of the titles that are used.
Oh, yes.
The distinguished members of the Senate are led by the Sergeant-at-Arms carrying the sword, followed by the Clerk of the Senate, Jeffrey S. Gossett, and President pro tempore of that body, the Honorable Glenn F. McConnell.
Saying, Dr. Edgar, we were talking about some of the formal language that's used here. If you read through the script, some of it seems very dated and quite old.
Well, it is, and of course we are a state with tradition, but I mean that's true in a number of other states. But I think particularly true here is our House of Representatives can trace its roots back to 1692, when there was a first elected parliament, as they called it, in South Carolina. So, you know, we have a very long tradition in this state of representative government and somewhat fractious representative government. And governors have had to learn to get along with the General Assembly, or they don't get things done. And that can go back to the colonial period.
So this is not a new strain of politics that we've been witnessing here for the last 8 years or so.
No, but they had more power in the colonial period because the governor, in addition to his official salary from the British government, got a local annual bonus. And if he irritated the Commons House, they didn't vote his annual bonus.
And money talks.
Money talks.
Then, right? Well, obviously the Senate, only about a third of the number of members is the House of Representatives. So their procession does not take quite as long. We'll also be seeing some of the judiciary coming down the steps as well here momentarily. There you see Vincent Shaheen, an unsuccessful bid for governor running against Nikki Haley. Came up about 4 percentage points short of being inaugurated here today. Still a young man, still has some high hopes and aspirations from what I'm told. Also worth noting that Governor Haley will now be the youngest governor in the United States at the age of 38.
She will be, but she's not the youngest governor in the history of South Carolina.
That would be who?
That would be Governor Charles Pinckney, one of our founding fathers. He was 32.
The forgotten founder.
And actually, David Beasley was 1 year younger when he was inaugurated as governor. So
And that was in 1994.
yeah, he elected in 94 and inaugurated in 95.
Up next, you will see the members of the Court of Appeals. And then after that, members of the Supreme Court, as we make our way through a pretty long list and a long processional. A lot of chairs to fill up there on the South Steps.
The more bodies will make it
The
warmer.
South Carolina Court of Appeals, represented by the Chief Judge, John Cannon Few, and Judge Thomas E. Huff, Paul E. Short, Jr., H. Bruce Williams, Paula H. Thomas, Daniel Pieper, Aphrodite K. Conduras, John D. Gethers, and James E. Lockley.
Look at the coats. I mean, you can tell everybody's, you don't wear overcoats like that much in South Carolina. It's,
There you see Chief Justice Jean Toll there at the top of the steps for our audience listening in on ETV Radio. Glad you could be along for our live statewide coverage of the 95th inauguration. What we're looking at now is the south side of the state capitol. Well, it takes a fair amount of time to navigate each one of those steps from top to bottom.
well, it is, and somebody had to work hard to get those things cleaned off. I mean, seriously, with the ice the last 2 days.
You're absolutely right. I know many of our friends in the upstate still snowbound
The
today.
South Carolina Supreme Court, represented by Chief Justice Jean Hafer Toll and Associate Justices Costa M. Placonis, John W. Kittredge, and K. G. Hearn.
It is, looking at the Chief Justice's robe there, it is very windy on the south side.
Yeah, they were expecting wind gusts today in excess of 25, 30 miles an hour. And I think right before we came on the air, the temperature was only 34 degrees, so you can only imagine what it's like sitting out there in the audience today. But I can tell you, I don't think there won't be too many folks thinking about the weather. People very close to the governor-elect. I mean, for them, this is a tremendously
We are honored
exciting
to
day.
have with us today a member of the South Carolina congressional delegation, representing the 2nd Congressional District, Congressman Joe Wilson and Mrs. Wilson.
And Governor-elect Haley, of course, is in Congressman Wilson's district.
Congressman Wilson, of course, from Lexington. Big, big day for him and his family. You see his wife, Roxanne, there. His son, Alan Wilson, has been elected Attorney General, also being sworn in today. So that is one proud lady as she continues to her proceeding down those steps. Not making it here today is Senator Jim DeMint. I was not given a reason why he was not able to join us, although we do know he's from the upstate. There's still a lot of travel issues there.
It's our pleasure to also have with us today one of our state's U.S. Senators, Senator Lindsey Graham.
And all of these dignitaries are being escorted by Citadel cadets.
That is per tradition.
That's per tradition, at least in the last century.
The Citadel dating back to about 1860, is that correct?
No, it predates the Civil War.
It does.
Yes.
It is a privilege to now introduce to you some very distinguished guests and dignitaries joining our ceremony today. Mrs. Carol Ashmore Campbell, Jr., and her son, Michael Campbell.
Iris Campbell, of course, the widow of former Governor Carroll Campbell, one of the most popular governors the state had in the last 25 years.
I still refer to her as Miss Iris. I see her on occasion, one of my favorite people. The Campbell name carries an awful lot of weight here in South Carolina. And she provided a key endorsement for Governor-elect Haley earlier, I think it was in June, if I'm not mistaken, in Greenville. And I think that was rather important to Miss Haley. When the Campbells speak, usually an awful lot of people in politics, especially in that part of of the state definitely tend to perk up and listen. She spends most of her time along the coast in Debadew near Pawleys Island.
But the Campbell mantle was not being able to pass down to the sons in running for public office.
No, Michael has made an unsuccessful attempt for office. Carroll III, Tumpy, as many people know him, an unsuccessful bid for the 1st Congressional District earlier this year. But that name's still gold-plated in many ways. Many people have fond memories of the former governor. He did a lot to bring BMW here to the state, to economic development.
Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi.
And there you see a gentleman whose name is mentioned from time to time as a contender for the 2012 presidential nomination on the Republican Party side. Of course, the governor of Mississippi, also the former national chairman of the Republican Party.
Right.
Very popular in his home state. Matter of fact, when the Republican Governors Association met out west in December, there were a number of events where you could see Miss Haley and Mr. Barbour side by side, and whether it be in a speaking panel or press conference, ideologically very close to one another.
The former ambassador to Canada, the Honorable David Wilkins and Mrs. Wilkins.
Might also mention that Speaker Wilkins, now the chairman of the board of Clemson University, says he's as busy as he has ever been, even though he is out of public life now. Still a very important person in South Carolina politics.
No question about that. And of course, when people were talking about runs for governor, had he chosen to put his hat in the ring, been a very, very strong candidate.
Well, I know he enjoyed his time in Canada. Many people were befuddled as to why he would leave and go be the ambassador, but he told me straight that when the president calls and asks you to serve your country, it's pretty tough to say no. And when George W. Bush asked him...
The mayor of Columbia, the Honorable Steve K. Benjamin and Mrs. Benjamin.
And to finish the thought there, when President Bush called him, he said there was simply no way to say no. He loved being Speaker of the House, but he also enjoyed his job as ambassador.
And he was a very successful Speaker of the House. Very successful.
Many of you have been watching Inauguration and listening to Inauguration proceedings for many years. Used to see Mayor Bob Coble there from the city of Columbia. It's a rather new mayor, and Steve Benjamin, who was elected earlier, I should say in the middle of 2010.
We are honored to have with us today representatives of the international community in the United States with interests in South Carolina. The Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the United States for India, Her Excellency Meera Shankar.
Well, this is a rather lengthy portion of the processional, Dr. Edgar, where many folks from the international community will be walking down the steps. Gives us a chance to talk about some of what we're expected to see here today. One of the things that caught my attention,
The counselor of the embassy's People Republic
as I've been reading up a lot about history here, we're celebrating the sesquicentennial, commemorating the sesquicentennial of the Civil War here.
That's a commemoration, not celebration.
Commemoration of the what happened late 1860 and early 1861. One of the things that caught my attention was Governor Pickens was sworn into office on December 17th, 1860. And I believe it was just 3 days later when South Carolina declared that they were seceding from the Union.
That's correct, on December 20th in Charleston. And of course, we used to have a different calendar for our elections, and people were elected in November and sworn in December, which quite frankly makes a lot of sense.
It does, doesn't it?
No lame duck, and the General Assembly used to meet in December and do its business in 2 weeks and then go home.
Well, I can only imagine the atmosphere and the mood at that particular inauguration must have been far different than the one we're seeing here today. You mentioned this is a celebration in some ways. How celebratory do you think that could have been in 1860?
Incredibly celebratory. The mood, there was tension, but the mood was high. The secession convention was already meeting in Columbia before it adjourned to Charleston, and everyone knew what South Carolina was going to do. You didn't have to have a poll. All 169 men eventually signed the document, but there was never going to be any doubt that South Carolina was going to secede. If you look at the newspapers and you read the correspondence from the time Lincoln was nominated, South Carolina was well on the road to secession.
And let's go ahead and point out that they had the secession signing ceremony down in Charleston, and that was because of what? There was some sort of outbreak here?
Well, there was allegedly an outbreak of smallpox. There was one case, but the difference was Columbia was not exactly a hotbed of secession. A lot of the local prominent leaders like Wade Hampton were old conservative cooperationists, and they would go along with secession, but they were not. This was not the hotbed of secession. Charleston was, where there were crowds in the streets screaming for secession. So it was a political move. The technical reason was, yes, because of smallpox. The real reason was Charleston was a warmer place in terms of support for secession.
And what sort of role did Governor Pickens play in this entire episode?
Is there a doctor in the audience?
Was he a firebrand of sorts?
Well, he was elected as a moderate.
If there's a doctor in the audience, could you make?
But although Mary Boykin Chestnut said that's only in South Carolina. And of course, very quickly, within a year, the secession convention basically created a council that took authority away from the governor and the elected General Assembly. We almost had two operating governments in the state for about 24 months. Very interesting, very difficult time.
When I read the accounts in the Charleston Mercury from those times, you mentioned that there was a lot of celebration in the air. That certainly seemed to be the case right before Christmas. People in the streets.
And of course, the Mercury was the cheerleader for.
It was, wasn't it?
For the, operated by Robert Barnwell Rhett. It was the cheerleader for secession. Yes, I mean, even the old Courier, which was really the grand old newspaper of the state and of the South, it supported secession, but not in the sort of flamboyant way that the Rhett Mercury did.
Some would say incendiary way.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, their editorials, their stories were all slanted towards secession from the 1850s on, or 1850 onward.
Well, I just wanted to touch briefly on that part of history while we could, since we will be talking quite a bit about that in the coming months leading up to April. I want to remind our listeners and our viewers that the music being provided by the 246th Army National Guard Band of South Carolina, the National Guard commanded by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Jesse Moreland for today's pre-ceremony musical program. Also a member of the National Guard, Nikki Haley's husband,
yes.
Michael. And he was earlier today at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral during the prayer service in full military uniform.
Yeah, dress blues.
Dress blues, there you go. So we've had a bit of a momentary lapse here in the procession. When we come back, we will also see some very familiar faces, former governors here of South Carolina. We know that Dr. Edwards is in the audience along with David Beasley. Jim Hodges is also here today.
And you'll notice the flags on the state capitol are at half-mast. At least they appear to be.
They sure do. I understand there's been some sort of a medical issue there involved with the processional. That's why they've temporarily put a halt there, both to the music and to the folks walking down the steps. I want to remind our listeners listening on our statewide audience, ETV Radio, that this is the 95th South Carolina Inaugural. Coming up soon, we'll be seeing the inauguration of Governor-elect Nikki Haley. She has an incredible, what we really call now the quintessential American story in many ways, Dr. Edgar. Her parents, first-generation Indian immigrants, came here to this country with not a whole lot of money. She was brought up in rural South Carolina in the town of Bamberg, and yet she has managed to make it all the way to the governor's mansion. That is a story that so many people can identify with.
Well, it is an American story because from 1917 to 1965, persons of Asian Indian extraction were forbidden by the immigration laws. They couldn't immigrate to the United States. It was only in 1965 that the immigration laws were changed so to welcome individuals from that part of the world. And so the fact that her parents came here and made their way the way they did, it's a real American success story. And we've got a number of those in the history of South Carolina. Solomon Blott, who for many years was Speaker of the House. His father was a Russian immigrant who came over here started out as a peddler in Barnwell.
Well, there was a name for that power base they had in Barnwell, wasn't there?
The Barnwell Ring.
The Barnwell Ring.
Barnwell Ring, oh yes, very, very powerful. Some would dispute that it existed, but it was there.
Well, I think I've heard of Speaker Blott's name mentioned an awful lot with some of the old timers and old political hands who have been around Columbia for many years. Things were much different back in those days. We're back now live in our Columbia studios. Dr. Walter Edgar here joining us for our inauguration ceremonies today. There's just been a slight delay. We'll take you back out to the state capitol here momentarily. But one of the things that I think the national Republicans are interested in, that Representative Haley is a fresh face in many ways for them. They talk very consistently about expanding what they call the big tent of the party, and she gives them an opportunity to reach a constituency that wouldn't normally be identified with the Republican Party in many ways.
Well, that's true, and the fact that she is also a woman. When you put Representative Scott from the 1st District in with Nikki Haley, this gives South Carolina quite a different face nationally and internationally than what we've had in the past century.
Now, I'm being told that the person with the medical issue there in the Capitol grounds is a state trooper. And that's why the procession has been halted here for the time being. Miss Haley, of course, in the cover of Newsweek magazine earlier this year, the first time alone by herself, and then appeared again later as part of Sarah Palin's Mama Grizzly band that was so much in vogue here towards the end of the election season.
One of the few successful Mama Grizzlies.
That's right. Indeed. Miss Angle, one of the prominent members of that pack in Nevada, failed in her bid to unseat Harry Reid.
And the senatorial candidate from Delaware.
Christine O'Donnell.
Yeah.
Also failing. Before we take you back out to the state capitol, I can just sort of give you a brief overview of who the rest of the folks we are expecting. As I mentioned, we'll be seeing some familiar faces and some of the former governors that are here. Also, Mr. Caton Dawson, who was the co-chairman of the inaugural committee. Many folks familiar with him if you follow politics in South Carolina. Almost was the national chairman of the Republican Party.
And for many years was chairman of the state Republican Party.
Again, a very skilled and effective politician who's not done yet, I can assure you of that. We will also see all of the elected officials coming up here in just a moment. All of the constitutional offices, the statewide elected offices, now held by Republicans. If ever there were a question whether or not this was a Republican state, I don't think there was much before the November election, but this one sort of put a hammerlock on that.
Well, it did, but then you have to look at the margin of victory that Governor Haley had for a Republican state. That was a very narrow.
It was only 4 percentage points.
Yeah.
Most of the other folks who ran on that particular day who were Republicans won by double digits. I think with the exception of Dr. Zais, General Zais from Newberry College, who will be the new superintendent of education. I think he won by 8 or 9 points.
But there's no question that this, I mean, this is the first time that this has happened. In fact, South Carolina was in terms of the Republican Party, when they seized control of both the House and the Senate, it was the only state in the Deep South where the Republicans controlled both houses of the legislature. So the Republican Party's made tremendous strides in South Carolina since the days when it was a part of the solid South. And that began to crack in 1948 with Strom Thurmond running on the Dixiecrat ticket.
Well, and I can tell you, I think we look back into the 1960s when many politicians were self-identified Democrats. Certainly when Richard Nixon came here in 1966, I'm told, and it was related to a great story that Pat Buchanan told me, the old Hampton Hotel that was across the street from the Capitol. Of course, Nixon at the time was literally out in the political wilderness. He had lost his run for the presidency against JFK, lost in his run to be governor of California.
He said, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore."
It wasn't necessarily true. Buchanan said they were on a tour, a speaking tour of the South in '66, and he said when they came to Columbia, you could just feel the tension. That many folks felt like law and order was slipping away. Of course, you had the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act that were on the docket up in Washington, D.C., that many people in the South were fearful of. Integration obviously was taking place as well. There were a number of issues in the 60s that put and pushed a lot of these folks who were Democrats into the Republican Party eventually. Was that not true?
That's correct. And of course, in '64, when Strom Thurmond switched parties, against the advice of Harry Dent and all of his closest advisors. And he did so to support Barry Goldwater running on the Republican ticket.
That was a very contentious campaign against Lyndon Baines Johnson, wasn't it?
Yes, and Goldwater carried the states of the lower South and Arizona. I mean, Johnson won in a landslide.
How would you characterize that Goldwater strain of politics? Is that libertarian leaning? It's not libertarian.
You know, it's very individualistic, and a lot of what's going on today could hardly be called. I mean, Barry Goldwater was very much for individual rights. He didn't want government telling people what to do in almost any respect. And there's some folks who want government to tell people what to do, whether it's has to do with prayer or personal conduct. Barry Goldwater was very much an individualist, and people used to say there was not much difference between somebody on the far left and Barry Goldwater on the far when it came to individual rights.
He, of course, is senator in Arizona, and that strain of politics out west, that rugged individualism that you're talking about, still very dominant in many respects.
Oh, there's no question.
At least in the
that.
Rocky Mountain states.
Oh yeah, very much so, very much so.
Well, again, just to remind our audience that's listening on ETV Radio, you're joined here in our studios with Dr. Walter Edgar. There's just been a brief break in the processional here as we await the inauguration of Governor-elect Nikki Haley. There's been a medical issue. A trooper, I think, has encountered some problems there at the top of the steps. But we'll get back underway here momentarily. But just to remind our audience, whether you're listening at home, driving around the state, listening to ETV Radio, that we've just had a brief pause in today's ceremonies.
Beautiful sunny day, although if you look at the flags on the top of the State House, Mark, I mean, they are really whipping around.
We used to call this, growing up in Louisiana and Texas, a Bluebird Day. I don't know if did you know that term in Mobile growing up?
A Bluebird Day?
No.
No. What?
Well, not a single cloud in the sky for the most part, and very cold and clear.
Well, it certainly is cold and clear. But like I say, that's been the story for certainly the last two, having been on the south side, personally, 10 feet up.
Yeah, that's right.
The wind can catch us from as it whips up South Main Street.
Well, after we get through, we're right in the portion where many of the international dignitaries are making their way down the steps to their seats. And after that, again, we'll be seeing some of the former governors and then all of the statewide elected officials. Hugh Weathers been reelected the Commissioner of Agriculture. Major General Robert Livingston is the new Adjutant General-elect. So that'll be a new face. We also have a new Superintendent of Education, and Mick Zais. Mick Zais, longtime president of Newberry College. His first run for political office and won rather handily. I know a lot of Democrats felt as if that was one position they could hold, but he had no problem winning that particular election as well.
No, in fact, a number of Democrats were really irritated when the incumbent, outgoing Jim Rex, decided to run for governor because he was doing a good job, and they thought by his running against in the governor's race, basically giving up the state superintendent of education. There was some real angst within the Democratic Party over that.
There was. I asked Dr. Rex about that on my radio program in December, about the decision to do just that, because he was well aware of the criticism, well aware of the fact that he probably would not be supported to the extent that Senator Shaheen was being supported. But he told me that he could see the political wind shifting, and he knew, as tough as it was the last 4 years to sort of work with both a Republican House and a Republican Senate, he felt like it was only going to get that much harder for the next 4 years. And he may have a point there. The political wind's very much Republican dominated right now.
Well, there's no question about that, but then we also have a tradition of incumbency in South Carolina. So, I mean, who knows? But the education debate is something that, in terms of, we've talked about the budget, that's going to certainly be on the table in the next, with this session of the General Assembly.
Many people believe in over the years that things like education, sort of the sacred cow of the budget, but when things like health and human services and education take up literally 2/3 of your general fund and budget there, extremely difficult to not touch some portion of those funds coming up in the next few months. And I'm not sure just how much folks at home listening or watching realize just about how much pain is about to be inflicted through cutting this budget. As I mentioned, over an $800 million hole coming up here. We might see a $4.1 million budget, where just a few years ago it was about $8 billion.
Well, not only that, but we have, Health and Human Services and DSS both running, and Corrections running, all three of them running deficits.
HHS, pretty significant deficit, over $250 million. So we're just about to get back underway there in the grounds of the Capitol building. There's been a brief delay for a medical issue there. Some of the other faces, people winning elected office, I mentioned Alan Wilson, who will be the new Attorney General. No stranger to politics here in South Carolina. He is a political novice, although I should say that he worked for the current Attorney General, at least for the next hour or so. Henry McMaster worked in that office for a while. Curtis Loftus here, also a new politician in Columbia. He is the state treasurer-elect. Converse Chellis, the outgoing treasurer. We have a new Secretary of State, Mark Hammond. Ken Ard is the new Lieutenant Governor. He is from Florence, a businessman there with no political experience as well. I'm told the trooper who had a medical issue there in the grounds of the State House is just fine, nothing to worry about at home, but that's why we're having to delay here for just a moment before we can go on with today's activities. These inaugural speeches that the governors usually give, I imagine this sort of sets the tone for what they hope to accomplish over the next 4 years?
Yes, and I would never inflict this on my graduate student, but I have read every inaugural address.
You have?
Every State of the State address from 1900 to the present. And you talk about education, which is obviously a key issue. Every single governor has said that is the most important thing in South Carolina, which makes you wonder why we still are in the situation we are in terms of education. Well, every single one.
Was there not a change, say, mid-century, 1950s? I mean, it seems to me like after the war, more people had access to education, or perhaps it was more important. You didn't have so many people working on farms anymore. And
well, part of it was, I mean, Jimmy Burns was very blunt when he got the 3-cent sales tax to pay for improving the schools. He said, we're paying for what our fathers and grandfathers should have done but did not do.
And that's because they really needed help there at home for the most part, is that right?
Well, a lot of it had to do with race, but it also is rural schools in this state. People need to look at it in terms of rural versus urban as opposed to necessarily always black and white. The rural schools were the ones that were underfunded. We had over 1,000 school districts in the early 1950s.
1,000?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, people say we have too many now, and we don't even have 90. I think it's 84
Ladies and gentlemen,
is the number.
before we carry on, I'd like to offer a moment of silence, perhaps a prayer for our Bureau of Protective Services officer who fell down. The doctor, by the way, said that he would be fine. And thank the doctors that were able to come up very quickly. And we carry on our ceremony today with representatives of the international community in the United States with interests in South Carolina. The Honorable Consul of Chile, the Honorable Carlos Salinas.
So back underway with the proceedings here at the state capitol in Columbia. I'm Mark Quinn, joined alongside Dr. Walter Edgar, South Carolina's 95th inaugural. So you were mentioning, Dr. Edgar, that you had read all of the State of the States, all of the inaugural speeches. Do you think that they do carry a lot of weight? That what is said here today does sort of set the political tone in Columbia?
Well, certainly the inaugural speeches set the tone for the administration. What that particular governor really wants to get done, and whether that gets done or not depends upon how that governor is going to cooperate with the General Assembly. But they really set I mean, whether you're dealing with Richard I. Manning, who was probably the most effective governor this state has ever had, or Cole Blease, or Jimmy Burns, you're getting the sense of what their vision for the state, and in some cases with Burns, what we really need to do.
And this was this transition more from an agrarian society to that sort of more modern industrial society?
Well, certainly after World War II, we went from being predominantly agricultural, although we would continue to be officially predominantly agricultural to the 1960s. But this was the development of, under Burns, real, and Thurman first and then Burns, real industrial development and recruitment began after World War II.
Here, Tom Clark just now mentioning and introducing Governor Edwards and his wife Ann Edwards, still very active in their communities down in Mount Pleasant.
Active in the community, active in the state. When he left office, he probably had the highest popularity ratings of he and Dick Riley of any governor in recent history. And of course, he was the first Republican governor in South Carolina since Reconstruction.
And he had a very long, productive career after he left the governor's
The
office.
Honorable David
He did,
Muldrow
and
Beasley
here's an
and
example
Mrs.
of
Beasley.
an individual who had faced a legislature that was of the other party, and yet he got incredible things through, including probably the most important piece of education legislation I would consider the Education Finance Act.
Indeed, extremely important. Governor David Beasley, walking down the steps now, very busy man as well, elected in 1994, served from 95 until 99. His wife, Mary Wood Beasley. They reside in Society Hill, but Governor Beasley literally
Honorable
is all
James
across the
Ovis
country on a regular
Hodges and
basis
Mrs.
doing
Hodges.
consulting work. Governor Jim Hodges followed Governor Beasley to the governor's mansion. His wife, Rachel, there. They live in Columbia. He's also very active with consulting work, flying back and forth between here and Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. He served for one term and then gave way to Governor Sanford, whom he lost to in 2002, and then left office in 2003.
Right.
We now present the chairman of the Inaugural Committee, Mr. and Mrs. Caton Dawson.
And as you mentioned earlier, Caton, very active, very prominent in national Republican Party politics.
Well, he still has a hand in
And Mr. and
politics
Mrs. Kenyon
these days,
Wells.
even though not formally per se, but with the primary elections coming up, presidential elections coming up next February here in our state, perhaps early March. He will certainly be a very important figure and somebody you'll see an awful lot of. We are coming up to the portion of the processional, Dr. Edgar, where you'll be introduced to all of the statewide elected officials.
And we also have all the presidents of institutions of higher education, I think, coming up before those, Mark.
Well, I would think
Next,
if you're a
we
president
present-
of an institution of higher learning, you would want to be here today because they're certainly facing some budget shortfalls as well.
They're all coming out in order. They're not mentioning
In the academic world, for our radio audience, it looks as if the college presidents are dressed in,
they're in full academic regalia,
full academic regalia.
which includes the cap, the gown, and the hood, depending upon their degree. Most of them have doctorate degrees, and those are the colorful hoods that are
That's what we typically see on graduation day, is that correct?
Yes.
We now present the state officers and the state officers-elect.
And we have a number of those. That was one of the reform
The Commissioner of
efforts that,
Agriculture, the Honorable Hugh E.
Carol
Weathers
Campbell
and
wanted to
Mrs.
get the number of
Weathers.
constitutional officers reduced, something Mark Sanford talked about.
Very difficult to do, as many politicians and governors have learned. Commissioner Weathers there from Bowman, very prominent farmer. There's a very large farm there, very
The
popular with many
Adjutant
folks in that line of
General-elect,
work.
Major General Robert E. Livingston, Jr., and Mrs. Livingston.
We are the only state that elects our adjutant general.
Why is that?
That goes back to the tradition from the Tillman days of the 1890s to elect as many people as you can
The State
in the
Superintendent of
hopes that
Education-elect,
the opposition
Honorable
doesn't,
Mitchell M. Zase
you
and
spread
Mrs.
it out,
Zase.
give everybody an elected office.
Nick Zase and his wife walking down the steps right now.
The
Of course,
State
a West Point
Superintendent of
graduate,
Education, the Honorable
one-time
James
Brigadier
E.
General,
Rex
longtime
and Mrs.
president
Rex.
of Newberry College. Dr. Rex also following right behind after serving a 4-year term. His wife, Sue, live out at Lake Wateree. He will remain very active in some sort of way in education
The Controller
circles, I know.
General, the Honorable
I'm sure he
Richard
will.
Ekstrom.
Of course, the Ekstrom family, longtime active in state politics, Republican Party politics.
The Attorney General-elect, the Honorable Alan Wilson and Mrs. Wilson.
Alan, a young man from Lexington, just turned 35, I believe, served in the Middle East during the Iraq War. I believe made a trip to Afghanistan. His wife Jennifer, very
The
familiar
Attorney
to
General,
folks in the
the
Midlands,
Honorable
longtime
Henry Dargan
television
McMaster
reporter
and
for
Mrs.
WIS
McMaster.
Television. So I said a big day for the Wilson family. You see, outgoing Attorney General Henry McMaster, and there's somebody who's been involved in South Carolina politics for
The state
like 25, 30 years.
Absolutely, former party chairman, unsuccessful candidate for U.S. Senate.
Served as Ronald Reagan's federal prosecutor, I believe.
Yeah. And of course, after he lost in the primary, he came out very strongly for Haley in the runoff, has been a part of her transition team.
Yeah, many of his longtime aides and right-hand people now working for Miss Haley will be part of her
The state
administration.
treasurer, the Honorable Converse A. Chellis III and Mrs. Chellis. The Secretary of State, the Honorable Mark Hammond and Mrs. Hammond.
I might say that
The wife
we are
of the Lieutenant
coming
Governor-elect,
close now
Tammy
to that
Kennedy
moment where
Ard.
we get our first glimpse of Governor-elect Haley. And that's quite a moment when you finally see that person emerge at the top of the steps and they make their way down to the podium.
They will, and of course, as is tradition, the audience will rise when they're all seated now
Right.
for all of this processional that's been going on. But when she is announced, I'm sure there will be a standing ovation. That's very traditional. And of course, the people who come to inaugurations are the folks who wanted that person to be governor, so they're going to be especially enthusiastic. I mean, that's whether it's this governor or whether it was Mark Sanford or Jim Edwards or Jim Hodges. These are their family and friends. It's their big day.
Speaking of family, we're about to see the family of Governor-elect Nikki Haley. Married in 1996
And
to
now,
Michael
the
Haley.
children of the governor-elect. Her children, Miss Rena Kumari Haley and Master William Nayland Haley. Please welcome the husband of the governor-elect, William Michael Haley.
The audience and crowd there at the base of the steps already standing and clapping as Mr. Haley makes his way down the steps. First time that we have had. How's he going to be referred to? What's the formal title? First man? First gentleman?
Be first gentleman.
Yeah.
He's not going to be first dude.
I don't believe. I think that was the name that was affectionately given to Todd Palin up there in Alaska by
Yes.
Sarah Palin.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Lieutenant Governor of the great state of South Carolina, the Honorable Andre Bauer, and the Lieutenant Governor-elect of the state of South Carolina, James Kenneth Ard.
Lieutenant Governor Bauer stopping by our radio studios in December to say that he'll be spending most of his time in Greenville. He has several business interests around the state. He's been in public life for 16 years, and for somebody who's essentially my age, that's most of your adult life there. He said he was ready for a small break. Ken Art, a businessman from Florence. And now we await Miss Haley and her walk down the steps.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and greet the governor of the great state of South Carolina, His Excellency, Marshall Clement Sanford, Jr., and the governor-elect of the great state of South Carolina, the Honorable Nikki Haley.
There was a lot of speculation as to what Mrs. Haley would wear. She's wearing first of all, a very warm coat, very attractive outfit.
Well, her family in the clothing business for many years, a business that she helped run. It would make sense that she's dressed pretty sharp. Governor Sanford, obviously very familiar with this day here, having gone through this process twice before. Ideologically, very close in many ways to Miss Haley.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the presiding officer for this inaugural ceremony, the President pro tempore of the Senate, the Honorable Glenn F. McConnell.
Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen of South Carolina, welcome to the inauguration of the 117th Governor of South Carolina, and for the inauguration of the Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina and the constitutional officers. As a wife and the mother of two, Nikki Haley understands the importance of what is at stake, both for our state and for her family. With young children and a husband who wears the uniform of our state and nation, she should know full well the importance of what is ahead in the coming years for our state and this country. And knowing that, she has offered herself for service in this difficult time. Her steadfast convictions have brought her here today, ready to do what she believes is best for all South Carolinians. We have come again to celebrate the wonder of our system of government, a system of government that allows for the transition of power from one person to another without the need of guns or violence, but with only words and ideas. The people of South Carolina listen to the words and ideas of those here today and send each to represent them to the best of their ability. While not every voter supported those elected during the election, it is our shared duty to serve all South Carolinians in our actions in the years ahead. It was our words that got us here today, promises of what we would do and how we would act. It will be our actions in the days ahead that will determine whether the trust in us is warranted. We have come here today realizing these offices on which we embark are given to no man or woman in perpetuity, but instead are lent to us by our family, our friends, our neighbors and citizens of South Carolina who have sent us here, empowered by their faith in us to do what we believe is right and bolstered by the many blessings of our Maker. If this loan comes with a price, the price is a lesson we learned as children. Be open in your actions and always do what is right. In doing the people's will, every decision should be made as openly as practical and after due consideration of the facts. South Carolinians must be confident that our government will move forward with knowledge and principle in the sunshine of public view and review. As we strive to do right, we must also face reality. No person is perfect and therefore cannot expect it to be. However, as elected officials, we are and should be held to a high standard of personal and professional conduct. It is a standard we all accepted when we offered for elective office. We cannot be perfect, but we must be an aspiration of what can be when we do our best in the service of others. As Samuel Johnson said, and I quote, "It is reasonable to have perfection in our eye that we may always advance toward it, though we know we can never be reached," end of quote. Any decision that is made may be couched in terms of right or wrong, for the rightfulness and wrongfulness of decisions may always be debated. But differences of opinion are not what separate us, but what in fact makes us stronger in crafting a productive dialogue. However, the motives behind our decisions must always be what is in the best interest of our state, not what is in the financial or personal best interest. We are citizen legislators, and we have lives apart from duties in this Capitol. It is the wisdom of our private lives that offers guidance in our public decisions. But the two should never be so intertwined that our private lives are benefited by our public roles. Financial interest in a matter must never be the reason for action or for inaction, nor should financial interest allow our motives in a vote to be impugned. A stake in the outcome must never be a reason to have a difference of opinion. Equally important is to do right is that the process getting there looks right. We have all been called to serve for myriad reasons. We all have different ideas and varied goals. Despite our different issues and the different paths we take to get there, our legislative journey must also have the same starting point, our oath of office. No matter the political party or our philosophical bent, we all have one thing in common. The bedrock of our public and political service is our sworn oath to uphold and to follow the Constitution. To paraphrase Hugo Black, our Constitution was not written in sand, but in the foundation of our state and nation. It is our bedrock, and it is not to be altered by the shifting winds of current sentiment. Our Constitution must always be followed strictly and faithfully by those who elect to serve. It is what our founders put in place to protect those at home from those of us in Columbia and in Washington. It is a limit on what we can do. The Constitution is both the means to an end, as well as the beginning and the end of what we do. We must never allow our desire to achieve some laudable goal tempt us to try and bypass the Constitution. No great right will ever justify the great wrong needed to get there. We embark today on a great journey together. Collectively, we are a varied band of experiences, philosophies, politics, geography, race, and gender. It is like the assemblage of this group of legislators all playing a different musical instrument. The sound of 170 different instruments taken separately would be horrible, if out of key and each attempting to play their own tune. However, if each of these disparate sounds follows a common score and a common key, working together for the betterment of our beloved state, then those discordant notes will be transformed into a beautiful symphony that echoes from the mountains to the coast of better days and brighter futures. It will be the harmony that will lift us up through the tough days ahead. However, we must not let seeking harmony lead us into sacrificing principle. There are many issues that must be addressed. We must look at everything that our government does and inquire whether what we do works, could be done better, or should be done at all. We cannot be limited by the false security of what has always been done or by the false hope of change for change's sake. Sometimes staying in place means falling behind. Sometimes a change that does not make government more efficient or South Carolina's live better is a false promise to those who elected us. Let us leave here today knowing that the difficult times that face us are not partisan, nor are they insurmountable. They are challenges to us all, and their solutions lie in the collective wisdom. We all have a universal desire to do what is best for South Carolina, even if we have different methods of getting there. In striving for a better South Carolina, let us work together where we can and agree to disagree when we cannot, but accept that the other viewpoint is offered in good faith. In achieving the best for our state, compromise is not always a dirty word. Taking a small step forward is much better than simply standing still. Let us depart from each issue as we leave this celebration, united in a desire to provide for a better future for our children and grandchildren. With God's will, we will muster the strength, wisdom, and patience to do what we must. Our state's motto, Dum Spiro Spero, or, quote, while I breathe, I hope. Let us leave here and have each breath we take and each word we speak give hope to those at home that our best days are not behind us, but instead are yet ahead. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as the Reverend Dr. Brian Rainwater, pastor of Mount Horeb United Methodist Church in Lexington, delivers the invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty God, you have called your people to be strong and courageous, to not be afraid and not be discouraged. You promise to go with us, to never leave us or forsake us. We pray for your presence here today and in the future as we seek your will for our lives. Remind us of the blessings you have given us as a nation and a state. Let us accept those blessings with a spirit of compassion and humility. Call us to take seriously our responsibility to use what you have given us to be a blessing to others. We pray for our constitutional officers. On this day of their inauguration, we pray they will acknowledge you and serve you with wholehearted devotion. Endow their hearts with a spirit of wisdom and godliness. Fill them with a love for your truth and a commitment to help others. We pray for their families, and we specifically lift up our new Lieutenant Governor Ken Ard, his wife Tammy, their children Jesse, Mason, and Libby. We pray for our new governor Nikki Haley, her husband Michael, and their children Raina and Nayland. Strengthen their families in every circumstance and situation, for this is a journey they take together as husband and wife, as mother and father, as son and daughter. Call all of us to a closer relationship with you and remind every leader and every citizen of this truth. In Jesus Christ, we are more than we think we are. In Jesus Christ, we can do more than we think we can do. In his holy name we pray. Amen.
Please remain standing as we present the color guard for today's services. Members of South Carolina's Military College, the Citadel. Over 40,000 of our nation's armed forces men and women have been physically wounded during the current military conflicts. Wounded Warrior Project has been working to help injured servicemen and women recover from physical or mental injuries suffered during the current military conflicts. Here today to represent Wounded Warrior Project is a true American hero. First Sergeant Peter Lara's actions were directly responsible for the destruction of a terrorist cell and for the rapid evacuation of his wounded platoon members, all while having sustained serious injuries. First Sergeant Lara is the recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Member, and recognized as the Army Times Soldier of the Year in 2009. First Sergeant Lara continues to lead and train soldiers at his post in the Wounded Warrior Transition Unit at Fort Jackson. First Sergeant Lara will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, please join in the singing of our national anthem, led by international opera tenor Jorge Lopez Yanez from West Union, South Carolina.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave the proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the oath of office will be administered to the Lieutenant Governor-elect, the Honorable James Kenneth Ard, by the President pro tempore of the Senate, Glenn F. McConnell.
Raise your right hand, please, sir. I, James Kenneth Ard, do solemnly swear that I am duly qualified, according to the Constitution of this state, to exercise the duties of the office to which I have been elected, and that I will, to the best of my ability, discharge the duties thereof, and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States. So help me God. Congratulations. Governor.
The Lieutenant Governor will now administer the oath of office to to the state officers and state officers-elect.
It is now my distinct honor to administer the oath of office to our Secretary of State, the Honorable Mark Hammond, our State Treasurer, the Honorable Curtis Loftus, our Attorney General, the Honorable Alan Wilson, our Comptroller General, the Honorable Richard Ekstrom, our Superintendent of Education, the Honorable Mitchell M. Zase, our Adjutant General, the Honorable Robert E. Livingston, Jr., the Honorable Commissioner on Agriculture, the Honorable Hugh E. Weathers. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I am duly qualified according to the Constitution of this state to exercise the duties of this office to which I have been elected, and that I will, to the best of my ability, discharge the duties thereof, and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States. So help me God. Congratulations.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the state's poet laureate, Marjorie Wentworth of Mount Pleasant, will be reciting her original composition, The Weight It Takes.
The weight it takes. In the white silence that is winter, return to the river, if only for solitude. Begin at the roots. Touch the pulse that keeps flowing on its own. Sometimes you will need only this. For rivers are just a way for us to find one another. Each rock the weight it takes to keep us here. The fish, just fleeting friendships that will disappear and reappear when we least expect it. Beneath a tangle of trees, the riverbank is an altar holding water, the single vessel taking in miles of spinning leaves, lost feathers, and the dreams of all who come here. Now your life belongs to the world. Hold fast to everything beating with sunlight. Pull us together like water. Be the weight that grounds us through swirling hours of each day. When voices shout without ceasing, be the stillness we hear ringing in our hearts.
And now for your pleasure, the Sandlapper Singers, under the direction of Dr. Lillian Quackenbush, singing The World of Our Dreams, accompanied by Francis Webb, flautist Robin Ledbetter, and soloist Audrey Brown, followed by 67th Psalm, performed by the Claflin University Concert Choir, conducted by Dr. Isaiah McGee.
There is a day I long to see when nations be glad and sing for joy. For thou shalt judge the people righteously, and govern nations and all the earth. Let the people praise thee, O God. Let all the people praise thee. Praise thee. Then shall the earth, then shall the earth, yield her increase. On God, even our own God, shall bless us. God shall bless us, and all the ends of the earth shall fear him.
Ladies and gentlemen, the oath of office will be administered to Governor-elect Nikki Haley by the Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court, the Honorable Jean Hafer Toll.
Governor-elect Haley, raise your right hand, place your hand on the Bible, and take your oath. I, Nikki Haley,
I, Nikki Haley,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I am duly qualified,
that I am duly qualified,
according to the Constitution of this state,
according to the Constitution of this state,
to exercise the duties of the office
to exercise the duties of the office
of Governor of South Carolina,
of Governor of South Carolina,
and that I will,
and that I will,
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
discharge the duties thereof,
discharge the duties thereof,
and preserve, protect, and defend
and preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of this state
the Constitution of this state
and of the United States.
and of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present the Honorable Nikki Haley, Governor.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor of the great state of South Carolina, Her Excellency, Nikki Haley.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out on this beautiful, chilly morning. On this special day, I want to thank Michael and my two sweet children for their unconditional love and support they continue to show me. We as a family are honored to serve this great state. Michael and I want to thank both of our families for the strength, the guidance, and the advice that they give us during the best and the most challenging of times. They are the constant reminders of what it means to carry ourselves with grace and dignity. We want to thank Governor Mark Sanford for his service to South Carolina and his constant fight for the citizens of this state. To Ms. Jenny Sanford, thank you for representing South Carolina with strength and grace for the last 8 years. Your friendship has meant so much to our family. To the Sanford boys, thank you for allowing the people of South Carolina the opportunity to watch you grow up into fine young men. Rena and Nayland look forward to continuing your games and mazes in the mansion. Today is a great day in South Carolina. It's a day for new beginnings. It's a day to turn the page from the past. And it's a day filled with anticipation of the next chapter of our state's future. Before we talk about our bright future, it's important to pay respect to our past. Our state has an incredibly powerful and rich history. It's one that's not always been pleasant, but one that can teach us many great lessons. We have a history of fierce independence, and that independence has some remarkable relevance for us today. While in 1773, it was the Tea Party in Boston that became famous, there was also a whole lot of tea dumped into the Charleston Harbor that December. We declared independence from Great Britain some 4 months before Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. And at Kings Mountain, just over our northern border, our local militia, not professional soldiers, helped turn the tide of the Revolutionary War that brought us the freedom we still enjoy today. Let's see. Tax protests, tea parties, the grassroots beating the professionals. It does have a certain ring to it. Of course, when talking about our past, it would be wrong to mention our greatness during the Revolutionary period without noting the ugliness of much that followed. The horrors of slavery and discrimination need not be retold here. They too remain a fabric of our history and a fabric of our lives. But I do take comfort in and agree with the words of columnist George Will when he recently wrote this about our state's past struggles. If the question is which state has changed most in the last half century, the answer might be California. But if the question is which state has changed most for the better, the answer might be South Carolina. I stand before you today the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. Growing up in rural small-town South Carolina, my family experienced the state and this country at its best. No, not every day was perfect. No, we were not always free from the burdens faced by those who look and sound different. But we counted our blessings, and my parents reminded me and my brothers and sister every day how blessed we were to live in this country. We saw the constant example of neighbors helping neighbors. For us, happiness existed in not knowing what we didn't have, and in knowing that what we did have was the opportunity to better our lives through hard work and strong values. You see, my mother was offered the first female judgeship in her native country, but was unable to serve on the bench because of the challenges of being a woman in India. Now she sits here today watching her daughter become the governor of South Carolina, the state she proudly calls her home. When you grow up with a mom like that, the word can't is not in your vocabulary. I will always be the proud daughter of immigrants. I will always cherish our family's experience, and I will always strive in my actions and in my words to make South Carolina a place where all of our children, regardless of race or gender, know that unlimited opportunities for happiness and success await them. Today, our state and nation face difficult times. Far too many of our fellow citizens are without a job. Our economy is not growing as fast as it should, and our state budget has the largest shortfall ever. But when I survey this troubled landscape, I am not discouraged. We know that tough times can produce some of the best decisions, And it is our duty to make this time of challenge into the opportunity it can be to turn our state around. It is indeed a new day, and on this new day, we must commit ourselves to the proposition that failure is not an option. When I think on our present economic challenges, I am reminded of the words of Margaret Thatcher, who said, "Once we concede that public spending and taxation are more than a necessary evil, we have lost sight of the core values of freedom." Nearly 2 years ago, the federal government in Washington decided to transfer its irresponsible fiscal practices to the state. And our state, just like every other, accepted it. When we produce this year's budget, we will see the heavy price for having done so. In our coming years, we must recognize that we will not produce the jobs our people deserve by placing higher tax burdens on our workers and our small businesses. And we will not reach prosperity by increasing state government's share of our economy. Be assured, however, that I have every confidence we will achieve a much more prosperous place. And we will do so by going back to that spirit of independence that fueled South Carolina's leading role in defeating the strongest nation on earth 2 centuries ago. When we embark on this journey toward growth and prosperity, we must do so together with one vision. A vision that is focused on the success of our families and our businesses is a vision that is not impaired by partisanship, personalities, or distractions. We don't have time for that, and I won't stand for it. Many times over the last 18 months, I asked South Carolinians to join a movement. That movement was never about one person or about one election. Our state constitution requires the governor and the General Assembly to work together to serve South Carolina well, and serve together we will. But the energy that drives our cooperation does not come from this beautiful Capitol building behind me. The energy comes from the sound of people's voices. The success of the movement I asked you to join will be realized when elected officials are accountable for their votes, when citizen participation in government reaches new heights, and when the voice heard loudest is neither mine nor that of any other elected officials, but is that of the taxpayers of this state. In the days, weeks, and months ahead, we have the opportunity to reduce state spending and make it more efficient. We have the opportunity to improve education and allow our children to be successful regardless of where they're born. We have the opportunity to strengthen our small businesses to help them create the jobs our people need. We have the opportunity to restructure our state government to make it more transparent, more accountable, and more respectful of the people of South Carolina. We must seize these inspiring opportunities. If we do, we will have a state where good jobs are in constant supply, where South Carolina becomes the envy of the nation, and where we are so free of political distractions that even the media is forced to report good news. Just imagine that. That is my South Carolina. It's the South Carolina I want for my children and for every family in our great state. So with faith in God, who knows what is right, and faith in our own ability to use the skills and judgment He gives us to do what is right, we can make this vision a reality. Thank you. May God bless South Carolina, and may He continue to bless the United States of America.
God Bless America will now be performed by the Claflin University Concert Choir, Jorge Lopez Yanez, and Sandleper Singers, conducted by Dr. Isaiah McGee. The audience is invited to participate as directed. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the benediction to be delivered by the Reverend Charles Jackson of Brooklyn Baptist Church in West Columbia.
Let us receive the benediction. Eternal God, our Father, as we conclude the inaugural program for the state of South Carolina on this historic day, we ask that you would continue to sustain us with your guidance and protection. In the words of Holy Scripture, empower us to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with thee. And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace and prosperity, now and always. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated. The inaugural recession will now begin, led by Her Excellency, the Governor of South Carolina, along with Mr. Haley and their family.
Well, just a couple of notes here from Columbia. Mark Quinn along with Dr. Walter Edgar. Coming up here at 2 o'clock, Governor Haley with the family will make their way over to the governor's mansion. There's an open house from 2 until 4. There's an inaugural gala tonight in Columbia's Vista District at the Colonial Life Arena that a number of people will attend. There was a family fun night that was scheduled last night in Columbia, but because of the inclement weather, that event has been rescheduled for Saturday at 5:30 at the State Fairgrounds, the Canty Building. So Saturday 5:30, if you are interested in family fun night, it has been rescheduled. January the 22nd, Family Fun Night. Well, Dr. Edgar, in every way, historic moment for South Carolina, as we mentioned at the top of this broadcast. The first female governor in the state's history, also the first person of color. As we see, if you're watching television, her parents making their way back up the steps. But certainly a day, even if you're speaking about a female leading the state, that many people probably could not have envisioned as briefly as 40 years ago, I would think.
Well, and 40 years ago, it would have been illegal for her parents to come here. I mean, it's, you know, statewide office held by women in this state it's been very, very rare. The first one was Nancy Stevenson as lieutenant governor. But for the most part, it's been Secretary of Education, what one might consider, quote, a woman's job. I mean, this is governor of the state of South Carolina, and she carried very conservative precincts to win the election.
Well, we're going to come back here to our studios in Columbia. I want to thank everybody who's been listening on ETV Radio across the state here today. For everybody who's watched here on ETV, appreciation to you as well. It's been a historic day, one that we've been happy to be a part of. We will wrap up this event for you Thursday night, 7:30 on ETV and The Big Picture. We'll also have more for you throughout the day today on Twitter. You can follow us there on @TheBigPicture. For all of us here at ETV, thank you for joining us for South Carolina's 95th inaugural. I'm Mark Quinn. We will see you next time.
We now join our regularly scheduled program, which is already in progress.